Moving on to our interview today, we've got Joe Siddall, Blue Jays Central Analyst, joining us today. Welcome, Joe.
Hello, Robert. How are we doing throughout all this?
I think we all have to get T-shirts made. We're all hanging in there.
That's it.
How are you and your family doing during the pandemic?
Well, fortunately, we're doing relatively well. And for me personally, it's a lot like the off season, Robert. I come home after the World Series and I get to be home in Windsor for a few months before we head back to Florida for spring training. So for me, staying home a lot and doing some yard work and tending around the house is kind of what my off season is like. So we've been very fortunate. My wife is still working as well. So things could be a lot worse, and I know it certainly is for a lot of people. So we're grateful for the position that we're in, despite what is going on all around us in the entire world, let alone our community.
Yeah. With Major League Baseball shut down, how has COVID-19 affected you and Sportsnet's coverage?
One thing we have done, and we weren't sure how this was going to go, we got sent home right around the middle of March when Major League Spring Trainings shut down. And when we came home, we were literally just told to kind of sit tight and we're going to see how this goes. Well, after a couple of weeks, the decision was made that Jamie Campbell and I are still doing our Blue Jays Central show, but we're doing it virtually online. And we've produced a show a week that is not going on to television just yet because there's nobody, I don't believe, in the Rogers studios in Toronto. So we're doing it online. They're posting it on sportsnet.ca. I think we've done 3 or 4 shows now, and the plan is to continue with that. And at least the last couple have gotten a little bit more interesting for us because we got to talk some baseball, because the baseball talks are increasing, not so much about the pandemic, but where baseball may go in these next couple of months, because the discussions are happening more and more, and they're getting a little bit more pertinent to baseball being played back on the field. And so fingers are crossed for all of us.
Yeah, I've noticed on Sportsnet's been filling their time now with past games and movies. You know how that's been received, and what game or what baseball movie would you like to see?
Well, it's funny you ask, because it has been received very well, and some of our producers in Toronto from our show saying that our little segments have been received well, but so have the classic games, and what they call them the Blue Jays Rewind games. So, you know, I grew up probably like you, Robert. I was going to say a Tiger fan, but I know you're a Yankee fan. A lot of people around here grew up as Tigers fans. So seeing some of the classic Blue Jays games hasn't been bad. I don't mind tuning in on occasion because I'm still getting acclimated with that. I try to tell all my people at work in Toronto, I didn't grow up with this stuff like you all did. I was a Tiger fan, but they've been received very well. If there is a game, I did see something online just the other day about Maglio Ordonez's home run in the division series or the championship series to advance the Tigers to the World Series in '06. I was at that game, of course, working with the Tigers. I remember it vividly, and I certainly remember Dan Dickerson's call. I saw that online the other day, and I just got chills because I felt like I was right back at Comerica Park. I wouldn't mind seeing a game like that in its entirety. Not so much the World Series against the Cardinals because it didn't go so well, but those are the games for me that are closer to my heart because I was right there with the Tigers working with them at the time.
Any particular baseball movie you'd like to see?
You know, I've seen some on there. I was a big fan of The Natural, and the reason is I played in the minor leagues, a friend of mine by the name of Chris Pollock. Well, his dad was Bernie Pollock, the costume designer in Hollywood, and his uncle was Sidney Pollock, obviously produced a lot of movies. Well, we went out, my wife and I went out to visit him. He lived out in L.A. at the time. This is back still in our playing days. And he had the Wonder Boy bat that Robert Redford, of course, had, in his room. So he had it in his house. So I think of that, and I think back to that movie and that story of being able to be so closely related to that. I always have to share that story. I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah,
very much so. Very cool. What are your thoughts on the Major League Baseball proposal to start the season up?
I find it very hard to believe that baseball can be played, yet I understand that we all want and need for it to be played. Let's not hide anything here. Money's at stake. There is no question. It's a $10 billion industry now, so I think both sides will do everything they can to get baseball played on the field. The first proposal we heard the other day from the owners to the players was all about the strict rules and limitations and distancing and where players can be and how they have to share meals. And the list went on and on, pages and pages of it. When I saw that, I didn't even parse through the whole thing. I just kind of looked and thought, wow, how are you ever going to keep all of these things in check? So I'm sure things will have to be rearranged a little bit as they go, but they're following the direction of the health officials, which of course is the right thing. But it sure seems like it would be very difficult to implement all of these changes that they're asking for. Now, this is just the first step. Hopefully that first step is going to be the first step to a lot of quality following steps that lead to baseball, because we know that the owners and the players have butted heads on a lot of issues, mostly financially, over a number of years. And the financial proposal has not even come out yet from the owners, but the last I heard was that the owners aren't going to expand on that until the players will receive somewhat of a cut, which they have in terms of prorated salaries. But then the players say, we're not going to reply to any financials until you open your books. Well, it feels like we're back to collective bargaining. And that's not a good thing at this time in the world. So hopefully these two sides over the next couple of weeks can get together in some way, shape, or form and not have finances prevent baseball from returning.
Yeah, and we don't even get into all the ticket takers and the restaurants from around there, the parking, concessions. It's just an unfortunate situation, because if they were to come back, there's no fans to, support those people.
Yeah, I think if baseball comes back, there will definitely not be fans, at least to start. And you're right. When you mention all of those people, and because I go to the ballpark every day at Rogers Center with our job, when the Blue Jays are at home, we do our show from a set at the stadium, and there are so many of those people that you run into. The ushers, I'll be going from our set down the left field line down to the clubhouse before batting practice. I run into 3 or 4 people every day that you stop, have a little chit chat, because it's the one guy that's taking tickets, it's the one woman that's getting the souvenirs ready, and it's always a quick hello. But those are the people you really feel for, because it's hard enough for the fans to feel sorry for the millionaire and billionaire owners and players. Unfortunately, that's just the narrative, and it is the truth. But hopefully for all those other people, too, this game can come back, let alone the fans.
Yeah. Spring brings us a renewal, and kids are looking forward to starting the ball season. What do you advise young players to do during this pandemic?
Well, social media has been a wonderful thing, and I see all kinds of kids, whether they're doing their tee work or soft toss out in the driveway or hitting wiffle balls. Whatever you can do, that's what you do, because you have to try to stay sharp. I remember even back in my playing days and when I was coming up in the minor leagues, spending my winters here in Windsor, I used to drape a blanket over a piece of wood or a cord in my garage and just fire balls into it to simulate that I was long tossing. So you're trying to continue to increase that workload, just as though you were in Florida outside throwing and getting your arm in shape for spring training. Same you can do with hitting. And I said wiffle balls are a wonderful thing, but there's nothing like the real thing. And right now, that's the case for everyone. You just can't get together and do those things. Hopefully things improve in the near future, but you do everything you can. And I see a lot of kids getting creative, and it's a wonderful thing, whether it's flipping to each other in the garage or on the road, whatever they can. What I've seen for the most part, they're doing it safely. They're social distancing and keeping their distance. Hopefully they can get a little closer soon.
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts for the graduating seniors or those travel players that are looking to take the next step in their future, in their baseball futures?
No, sympathy. It's too bad for these young kids. I was there myself as a kid. I had kids come up through high school and play sports at the post-secondary level, and it's an exciting time, and choosing where you might go, what schools might be interested if you are going to play collegiately somewhere. And to have this happen at this particular time, I'm already hearing from some U.S. colleges in the States that are shutting down their baseball programs. And that's a really sad state. We certainly don't hope that doesn't spread too far across the U.S. or even here in Canada. But we know baseball programs aren't the big revenue programs, especially in the U.S. So it's pretty sad to see that starting, because you just wonder, you see 1 or 2 or 3 and how that snowball is going to go down the hill. It's very unfortunate for these young people at a pretty important time in their lives, not only pursuing their post-secondary education, but hopefully, too, playing a sport that they love, and it might get delayed.
And that leads to, discussion with no fans in the stands. How would this affect the minor leagues who are really dependent on attendance, and players such as Jacob Robson with the Tigers?
Yeah, it is very unfortunate. And even before this pandemic, we had heard all offseason about Major League Baseball stepping in and perhaps cutting out a lot of the minor league franchises across the United States. And that's a sad thing alone, because we all know the small towns that have minor league baseball, and they're cherished dearly by the local people in their communities, and they really help the economies in those small towns. And you think of cutting the number of teams, and there are an awful lot of minor league affiliates and minor league players throughout organizations. Are there too many? Perhaps. But at the same time, the fewer people you have playing this game at the lower levels, less chance there is for those 13th round Albert Pujols to come out. I mean, we know they're not all top 1 and 2 rounders that play in the major leagues. You do get a lot of those outliers from the later rounds. And I think of Jacob Robson, a local kid who is at that level right now, on the cusp of getting to the big leagues, especially with the Detroit Tigers. And I know Jacob very well, and I'm sure he's preparing himself and staying ready. But you hope for a guy like that. He's not on the 40-man roster, but you would hope that perhaps he is on that taxi squad roster that we're hearing about, that the rosters may be expanded from, say, 25 to 30 if baseball returns, but they might also have a 20-player taxi squad, which will essentially be like their AAA team because there's no minor league baseball. If you're a part of that squad, then that should increase his chances greatly, maybe of getting a call up and get that cup of coffee with the Tigers this season if there's baseball.
Well, we keep our fingers crossed for him and for all the players. Before we leave, recently the Tigers lost Mr. Tiger, Al Kaline. Do you have any few words about Al that you came across?
All the words you've heard about Mr. Kaline are true, because any of the ones that I've heard, whether it be on social media or from people that I know, genuinely just a sincere, fine man. Al's the kind of guy that would be around the ballpark all the time. Of course, he was called Mr. Tiger because that's who he was. He'd come down to the ballpark. He loved it. He would come down to the batting cage when we were warming up hitters, doing tee and soft toss work. He would chime in with his opinion once in a while. Other times, he just wanted to chat. He'd always ask, how is your family? How is your wife doing? How are the kids? How are the games? And he knew that I coached kids at the time. He was always asking about that. Just a genuine, wonderful man. I wish I grew up watching him play more. It was just before my time, because I've heard of all the great stories, but some of the things he did on the field, pretty remarkable as well, and that is why he is in Cooperstown, well-deserved. But what I'm going to remember most about Mr. Kaline, I was devastated by the news because I didn't know that he was even sick, because every time I had seen him, as recent as last year, he looked to be in very good health. But a fine man, and someone that you almost, not necessarily, I wasn't around him enough for him to be a mentor of mine, but someone that you almost want to emulate.
Yeah. Class would be a good word for Mr. Kaline. Joe, just to finish off, what are you looking forward to once the pandemic's over?
Well, I think the biggest thing is getting back to our real jobs. It's Robert, what you're doing right now, too, it's different. We live in a different world, and we're probably going to live in a different world. But it would sure be nice if a day comes where Jamie and I can get back on our set, whether it's in the studio in Toronto covering Blue Jays games, or hopefully, maybe next year, I don't see it happening this year, actually getting back inside the ballpark. There's nothing like doing our job from inside the ballpark, where we can talk to players and coaches and really have that feel with the fans and the stadium noise all around us. It's the best place to be.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you for all you do for baseball around here, for the Blue Jays. We really appreciate you, and please stay safe and stay well.
It's my pleasure, Robert. Thanks so much.